Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for coming and thank you for your patience in filling this beautiful hall to hear Dr. Vandana Shiva. My name's Margaret Halleck. I'm the director of the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics, an interdisciplinary center here at the University of Oregon. This session has two purposes. It is the closing plenary session of a fabulous conference on food justice that's been going on for the past 4 days. But it is also the occasion of the annual public address of the Wayne Morse Chair of Law and Politics. We at the Wayne Morse Center select themes for biennial inquiry, and our current theme of inquiry is called Climate Ethics and Climate Equity. And I'm sure that it's abundantly clear to all of you in this room and those of you that are watching elsewhere why we invited Dr. Vandana Shiva to be the anchor scholar on a theme on climate ethics. She's spent her entire career as a scientist and as an activist pursuing environmental justice. The Wayne Morse Chair is reserved for people that exemplify the best characteristics of Senator Morse: courage, independence, intellectual foresight, integrity, and a passion for peace through justice. Very few people on the planet exemplify these characteristics more than Dr. Vandana Shiva. The second purpose of the session is, as I said, to close a fabulous conference on food justice. These 4 days of conversations and discussions and scholarly presentations and presentations by activists about how we can improve our food justice system have been terrific. They were generously supported by the University of Oregon, including the President's Office, many departments, and we've had wonderful community sponsors. I want to particularly thank King Estate Winery for their very generous contributions, which have made many things possible at this conference. I also want to mention that the David Miner Memorial Fund is also a sponsor and somehow was not listed on the program as a sponsor, so thank you to the David Miner Memorial Fund. The format for this afternoon's session is that I will turn the podium over to Allison Carruth, the organizer of the conference, who will just give a very brief synopsis of what we've been trying to accomplish and discussing at the conference. Then President Lariviere of the University of Oregon will introduce Dr. Shiva. Following her public address, we've invited Andy Fisher to give some brief remarks. Andy is the executive director of the Community Food Security Coalition, one of the really most prominent national organizations working on issues of food sovereignty and food justice. And then we will have, hopefully, some time for some discussion and question and answer. It's now my pleasure to give the podium to the organizer of this conference. There's always one person whose brains and energy really make things happen. And in this case, it's Allison Carruth, an assistant professor of English, the author of a wonderful book called Global Appetites: Imagining the Power of Food. Please welcome Allison.
Thank you and welcome. I want to begin by echoing Margaret's thanks, and there's some others I want to express enormous gratitude to. I want to thank Margaret Halleck, without whom this would not have been possible, and who has expressed so much confidence and faith in the ideas of this conference. I also want to thank Lindsay Naylor, who's a PhD student in geography here, and the conference coordinator, who has been nothing short of brilliant, phenomenal, and extraordinary in every way. And I'd like her to stand for just a moment and to give her a round of applause. I also want to thank Abby Stiles, Rebecca Flynn, the staff of the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics, all of our volunteers, as well as the EMU staff. There have been at least 100 people who have given generously of time. And in addition to our sponsors who gave generously of resources, we are grateful for that. So thank you. And please join me in expressing that gratitude. And then I just have two final words of thanks. First, to the Department of English and to the Environmental Studies program. I'm an assistant professor of English and core faculty in Environmental Studies. And it was Harry Wanham, the head of English, and Alan Dickman, the director of Environmental Studies, who in some sense gave the seed money for this over 15 months ago. And so I am very appreciative of that early sponsorship and thank both of those departments. Finally, I want to, yes, thank you. Finally, there was an art exhibition, and it is ongoing through the end of this week. Associated with the conference, we had 6 really terrific artists, and if you haven't already checked that out, please do over the coming days. And I want to give a sort of a special thanks to the artists as well as to the School of Architecture and Allied Arts and the faculty members on the steering committee, Colin Ives, Carl Bingston, Kate Monlick, and Liska Chan, because it was really somewhat exceptional for them to offer that space, which is a student gallery space, for this exhibition. And I think as a humanist, I feel really strongly that that adds an enormous amount to our conversation and our thinking. So thank you. So what does food justice mean? I think our 3 conference themes, community, equity, and sustainability, begin to define it. We've heard a lot of other words: sovereignty, integrity, health, and healing. We've heard words like first foods and empowerment. But we've also heard all weekend that what these words mean is not universal. And above all, food justice happens when communities define the values and practices of their own food system. And it happens when we all think of ourselves as in community with one another. And not only within the human community, but within the community that includes animal, plant, mineral, and microbe. And so those are the 2 things I've walked away from this weekend. And among all that we've heard and shared and witnessed in these last few days, one idea particularly stands out to me, and that is the linked concepts within the Mali Bamana community that Professor Stephen Wooten researches, the concepts farming for life, or kabalo, and farming for money, or kawari nini. And in that community, those are not at odds, but both the farming for the collective and the farming on behalf of individual aspirations are valued. And I thought that was a really powerful framework. And to close, before I introduce President Lariviere, there is something else that really stood out and made this incredibly moving to me, and that is the number of young people who have been here in force. And so could everyone under the age of 30 please stand as you are able? Wow, that was even more than I expected. So I am, above all, an educator, and as an educator, this gives me such great hope about, as our opening plenary speaker, Fred Kirschenman, elegantly put it, our capacity to plan for and make happen the changes that will come. So I now am very honored to introduce to you another educator, and a dedicated and distinguished educator, our university president, Richard Lariviere, a leader who inspires in me a lot of hope about the future of education. There are many ways to introduce President Lariviere, who joined the university in 2009, coming here from the University of Kansas, and prior to that, the University of Texas at Austin. I'd like to highlight just 2 aspects of his many achievements. His profound investment in language and in the humanities. He speaks Hindi and French, and he reads 8 languages. And also his expertise in Sanskrit and in Indian legal and religious history. It's these dimensions of his distinguished career that make President Lariviere an ideal person to introduce tonight's speaker, who for many of us is a food justice hero, Dr. Vandana Shiva. So please join me in welcoming the university's president, Richard Lariviere.
Thank you very much, Allison, for that gracious introduction, and thank you, Margaret, for your work on this remarkable project as well. It's a real pleasure for me to be here this evening. I applaud the Morse Center for the Food Justice Conference for continuing the legacy of Senator Morse by speaking up for those who cannot and by questioning authority and holding power accountable. Thank you. When Margaret contacted me asking if I would introduce Vandana Shiva, I was thrilled. Vandana ji, maaf kijiye, meri Hindi bilkul kharab hogi. Lekin I must say to you, hum aapki yatra se samanat kar rahe hain. और आप अपने काम के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद और हमारा आशा है कि फिर आप जल्दी से वापस आएगी. So Dr. Shiva is a scientist. There wasn't anything secret there. I just thanked her for her work and told her that it was an honor to have her here and that we hope she comes back very quickly. Dr. Shiva is a scientist, an activist, and one of the world's leading voices in environmental justice and sustainable agriculture. She is trained as a physicist and completed her PhD on the subject Hidden Variables and Non-Locality in Quantum Theory at the University of Western Ontario in Canada. She later shifted to interdisciplinary research in science, technology, and environmental policy, which she carried out at the Indian Institute of Science and the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. Dr. Shiva has pioneered the organic movement in India and has established Navdanya, the country's largest network of seed keepers and organic producers. She serves on the boards of many organizations, including the World Future Council, the International Forum on Globalization, and Slow Food International. Dr. Shiva is also a prolific and admired writer, having authored dozens of books, most recently Soil, Not Oil, Environmental Justice in an Age of Climate Change. Among her many awards are the Right Livelihood Award, which is considered the alternative Nobel Prize, and the Order of the Golden Ark. In 2003, Time magazine identified her as an environmental hero. Dr. Shiva gives voice to the food justice movement in India, where the sovereignty of communities over how they farm and over whether or not they participate in global trade has eroded. Her activism and her writings advocate an alternative food paradigm to those of industrialization, neoliberal free trade, and privatized GMOs. Dr. Shiva is working tirelessly to show the world how food shapes cultures, economies, and ecosystems. It's an honor to ask you to join me in welcoming Dr. Vandana Shiva.
Thank you so much, President Lariviere, for such a warm welcome, and especially in Hindi. And thank you, Margaret, for 2 years of planning and perseverance and inviting me to be the Wayne Morse Chair. Thank you to your wonderful team, Alison and Lindsay, for pulling together artists and scientists. That's an unusual, I think it's my first, in terms of different streams. But most importantly, thank you, all of you, especially the future generations who are reclaiming the future of food. Thank you so much. Your participation, your contributions shows that the paradigm shift is already happening vigorously and fast. We just have to make sure it's fast enough, as our little discussion in the green room while I was talking with the president about the extremely destructive trends that we face. Will we be fast enough in shaping another future from the one that is dominating today? If we continue on the current trends, a seed famine and a food famine on a very large scale is inevitable. What do I mean by a seed famine? First, I mean that we lose the diversity of seeds that we need for a healthy planet and healthy food systems. And that's happening at a very, very fast rate. I remember in 1995 when the FAO organized the first conference ever on plant genetic resources in Leipzig. They acknowledged that 75% of the disappearance of biodiversity is because of industrial agriculture promoting monocultures. A seed famine also means that farmers have no seeds, that they have to buy them every season. It means that if they want to have organic seeds and grow organic foods, their seeds get contaminated. But it also means that seeds, the very source of life and fertility, start to become terminated. And we had a wonderful presentation from a literature professor on what that means for the human future. But it doesn't just mean a shift, because what is being offered is failing in its promise. In the last 2 decades, scientists constantly talked about how herbicide-resistant crops and Bt cotton crops and Bt crops were not a solution to weed control and pest control, and we've seen that emerge in the last 2 years. We've seen the superweeds take over southern farms, and there was a very, very vivid presentation in the science panel yesterday about how those who were the cotton slaves a few generations ago are now being used to manually take out these superweeds that no herbicide can control. And in India, the Bt cotton, which was introduced to control the bollworm, has created not just a super-resistant bollworm, but new pests that cotton has never known. I can't keep up with the names of the pests. It's mealy bug and army bug and the Lalia this year. Every year, there's a different devastation in the monoculture. A seed famine is also linked to the fact that seed, the very basis of life, becomes patented property, intellectual property. And the combination of all of this means seeds, which are the very source of life, end up becoming seeds of death. And we've seen this tragedy unfold in India, especially in the cotton sector. Now, cotton for India, of course, is so important because we domesticated the species of cotton that we've used. We had 1,500 varieties of cotton. I've seen in childhood brown cottons and red cottons and green cottons and blue cottons. And most importantly, our freedom struggle was based on the cotton, where Gandhi decided that he was going to spin cloth in order to get freedom. It was the period where cotton was the basis of slavery, cotton was the basis of our domination, it was the basis of the slave trade and cotton picking in the south of this country, and it was the basis of dumping machine-made cloth and destroying the textile heritage and with it the livelihoods of countries like India. So Gandhi pulled out the spinning wheel, and when he was asked, how do you think these small pieces of wood put together can bring you freedom, he said it's the only thing that can, because it's so small. It can be in the hands of the poorest person. And the last woman in the smallest hut can be a freedom fighter. And it's its smallness that gives the power to the spinning wheel. So when I came to know in 1987 that there were those who would like to patent every seed and genetically modify every food, that it was in the small actions that we would reclaim our seed sovereignty. Now, 98 was the year when I saw big ads in our newspapers about how Indian farmers would be growing the Bolgard cotton, which, as you know, is the trade name for the BT cotton owned by Monsanto. And this ad talked about a year. I rang up the Agriculture Ministry, I rang up the Environment Ministry and said, have they had approvals? And they hadn't sought approvals. They don't have to in this country. They just do their trials and introduce the commercialization. And for the first time with alfalfa, you were going to have regulation, and that's been brushed aside. So I did something that we are very fortunate to be able to do in our country, because we had a Chief Justice called Justice Bhagwati who created a system of public interest litigation where anyone, any Indian citizen has standing to defend the public interest and the public good. And so many of our environmental victories have been based on that opening of public interest law. So I sued Monsanto. And of course, it was recognized that these were illegal plantings. They weren't allowed to sell BT cotton seeds commercially till 2002. But globalization had anyway allowed them to start buying up Indian seed companies or having licensing arrangements with them. Once they became a monopoly, of course, the prices started to go up. So when they entered, the price of cotton seed used to be 5 rupees a kilogram. And the seeds sold at that time could be saved every year. Monsanto shot the price of BT cotton up to about 3,600 rupees a kilogram of seed. That's about an 80,000, it was between 3,600 and 4,000. That's between 7,200 and 8,000% increase in price. But if you take the fact that every year farmers must buy the seed compared to the other seeds that farmers can save over a 10-year period, it's a difference of 80,000%. And you can just see how over time the accumulation of debt for the farmer but profits for the company continues to grow. Monsanto now controls about 95% of the 20 billion seed market in cotton in India. And every year is extracting, or was extracting till we filed another case on antitrust, which has brought down the price a bit. But every year, 10 billion rupees from poor Indian peasants. Of the price of seed, 50% is royalty. And of course, they don't call it royalty because they were so keen to introduce the GM cotton before our patent laws were forced to be changed because of the World Trade Organization trade-related intellectual property rights. Because we had such strong movements in the country for this, they had to change it over 3 steps: the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and the Third Amendment. And the Second Amendment, which allowed patenting of genetically engineered seeds, hadn't yet taken place. So Monsanto calls this a technology fee. And in the case we are dealing with on antitrust, along with the government of Andhra Pradesh, where the first tragedy started to unfold, they don't talk about the price of seed. The government has put out a regulation to regulate the price of seed. And Monsanto's response is, this is a trait fee. It is not a seed price. And it's amazing the kind of responses we have to make to constantly bring it back to seed, because that's what farmers buy and that's what farmers sow. What they are paying a price for is a seed. And just by putting it as a trait fee or a technology fee, there's an attempt to escape from the reality of both governance as well as farmers' economic reality. Now, not only is the price shooting up, as I mentioned, 8,000%, because of the failure of the technology to be a pest control technology, we've had huge increase in pesticide use in cotton farming. You might remember the Bhopal disaster, which was from a pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide. And it was making carbaryl, 80% of which used to be used in cotton. And one of the offerings was BT cotton will allow you to never have to spray again. Those were the advertisements. Farmers of Vidarbha, a state where we work, are now using 13 times more pesticide. That's 1,300%. Now you add up all these additional costs, within 2 years, the farmers are in such deep debt, they cannot pay. And the money lenders are now a new breed of money lenders, which are the sales agents for seeds and chemicals, who have nothing to lose, because if the farmer can't pay, they get the land. And it's on the day that the land is being appropriated that the farmer usually ends their life drinking pesticide. 84% cases that we've studied of suicides are linked to BT cotton. 90% are linked to drinking of pesticide to end your life. So we've done reports, we keep counting. 10-page reports have now become 300-page reports on the seeds of suicide. But we believe there is an alternative. We practice it. We've created seed banks in these regions. And I was so happy a few weeks ago to be in Vidarbha, which is the heart of the farmer suicides, about 4,000 a year. We had saved some old varieties of cotton. They are giving farmers more yields as cotton than the BT cotton. But of course, they're getting rid of all those excess payments and therefore increasing the net income of farmers by 10 times. And there were 200 farmers in this meeting taking the seed to become free of the BT cotton. We have not just the risks and threat of a seed famine. 1 billion people are already experiencing a food famine. Those who don't have access to food, 1 billion hungry. I would add to it the 2 billion people who are being forced to eat food that's not worthy of being called food. And just as when seed, which is the source of life, which multiplies, which can be exchanged freely by humans amongst each other, by pollinators who move the traits around and fertility for the planet, when all those potentials, I remember long ago a debate in which one of the companies, I think at that time it was Cargill, because Cargill has now been bought up by Monsanto for the seed sector outside the United States. And the Cargill representative said, "Oh, we are so smart, we prevent the bees from usurping the pollen." As if pollination was theft. So with that kind of thinking, of course you will create terminator seeds. And that means you make an anti-seed. Seed, the source of life, loses its potential to support life. Food too, which should nourish us, which should be the very basis of sustenance for all. No other human being, no other species has achieved the amazing success of depriving itself of food. Others deprive them, like that beautiful play on Salmon is Everything, showing that not having enough river water flow led to the massive fish kills in the river. Others damage the salmon, but not the salmon itself. But we as a human species are destroying our own food system and our capacity to feed ourselves. So again and again, throughout the conference, there was reference to food deserts, referring to the inner cities, to the parts of the cities where normal access to normal healthy food has just been broken down in the richest country on this planet. I would call industrial farms a food desert. They're a food desert because they're not growing food. They're growing commodities. And commodities can be used to drive cars. That's where so much, I think it's 30% now, 30% of the corn is going to biofuels. They can be used to torture animals. I don't call it cattle feed. It's not animal feed. The animals, if asked, would never accept it. But worse, especially in countries like India, and countries like India are majority countries of the world. Most of the food is produced on small farms. 70% of the food today, 2010, is produced on small farms in the world. And small farms that have been locked into a chemical industrial cycle are food deserts, which is why we have half of the billion people who are hungry are today food producers, because they grow a commodity, they borrow heavily for the seeds and the chemicals, they have to sell their crop to pay for the debt, they don't eat the rice they've grown or the corn they've grown, and when they do eat, they have to borrow from that same moneylender to buy food at about 4 times to 5 times the price at which they sold the commodity. I've seen this happen with the rice, where a woman who was harvesting rice, I said to her, "You've got your harvest, now you'll eat well." And she said, "No, I won't. I'll just eat the gruel of rice. I can't eat rice." 4 rupees is what she sells it at for a kilo. 12 rupees is what last year she was buying it back at. And a system where costs of cultivation are higher than the price a farmer gets is a suicide economy. Individually for the farmer who's driven into debt, collectively for the human species. You can't have a production system where it costs more to produce whatever you're producing than what you can sell it at. It couldn't happen in automobiles. It couldn't happen in any other sector, but on the most vital aspect of life, how we produce our food, we've designed a system that is creating a suicide economy. And of course it works for those who sell costly inputs and buy cheap commodities, and it's the same people. And that vertical integration of the food system, which has been driven by the giant corporations, is getting intensified because the margins are so huge. 3 times over, you sell costly inputs, you get farmers into debt, then you get public tax money to pay the subsidies and the margins to keep it all afloat. India is spending $1.3 trillion a year for fertilizer subsidies, which is bigger than our defense budget. That's how chemical agriculture stays afloat. Rich countries are spending $400 billion in subsidies, which I would not call farm subsidies, I would call them agribusiness subsidies, which enables agribusiness to keep selling inputs nobody needs. They should have ended with the war. They are war chemicals. They should have been phased out of production instead of being allowed to enter agriculture as pesticides and fertilizers and herbicides. And then when the saturation of the market took place in this country and in Europe, the same agribusiness started to use trade treaties like at that point, the Uruguay round of GATT and then the WTO to push this extremely inefficient, wasteful system on the rest of the world. And I have witnessed what it's done to my country in the last 2 decades, starting from liberalization of 91 to today. India, of course, is always being announced as the country with 8.6% growth, 9% growth, even in the years of economic slowdown. But the story that doesn't reach the world, it doesn't even reach the corridors of power in India, is the fact that we have succeeded in pushing 25% of the Indian population to very deep hunger. Our levels of per capita consumption have dropped from 177 kilograms 20 years ago to 150, which is the levels of the Great Bengal famine in 1942. Not only is every fourth Indian hungry now, every third Indian woman is anemic, and every second child is wasted, a term the nutritionists use when your body weight is so low because of lack of nutrition that you're never ever going to grow up to be physically and mentally a full human being. The term is called wasted. And I think it's a crime to be wasting future generations. That is why we do the work we do, to show that it doesn't have to be that way. Now, when you start to think about food as a commodity, all attention, energy goes into how to make the commodity profitable. When you think of food as sustenance, nourishment, nutrition, culture, our very life, you start to think about how do you enrich that sustenance and nutrition and life. So I was just reading a report of the World Bank on the land grab, which is taking place in Africa, and there was a very good presentation on China and the big land grab in the session just before this one. And it's interesting, the World Bank talks about how this could be a solution to food insecurity. And I find that very interesting because industrial agriculture has always claimed to be a land-saving technology. And yet it is leading to the largest land grab we've ever seen after Columbus. If it was that efficient, why can't it stay home? Why does it have to go into the Amazon and cut down the rainforest to grow soya beans? If it's that efficient, why does it have to grab 20 million acres of land in Africa? And at the end of the World Bank report, they're talking about how this would solve food security because Africa could start growing these commodities. It calls it adopting a commodity perspective. So what would Africa grow? Wheat, maize, soybean, sugarcane, oil palm. Is that food for Africa? Africans eat cassava, they eat sorghum, they grow the tremendous millets. Most millets have been gifted to the world by Africa. In Ethiopia, they grow teff, they grow pulses, they grow beans, they have amazing greens. And in the very dry areas, I've seen the baobab tree, where you can't ever starve if that tree is around. I've been fed with meals created from the leaf, from the bud, from the fruit, from every part of the tree. Africa, after all, is the continent where humanity, Lucy, and now they have somebody else, but it's supposed to be our mother continent. And one would imagine that they know how to farm after all those centuries. And they don't have to grow more wheat than is already growing. They don't have to grow more palm oil than is flooding the market. Or more soya bean. Why does everything have to become soya? Of course, when power grows as big as it is becoming around the food system, there's an addiction to power. And I was personally very disappointed that The Obama White House did not look any different from the Bush White House as far as it came to food policy and agriculture policy and GMO policy. But worse, it isn't just the commodification by the grain giants. We now have a new level of commodification, financial commodification, by the financial giants who brought down the world economy in 2008. And they're using every instrument that created the subprime crisis and the financial crisis to aggravate an already existing food crisis. We've had so many speakers in this conference refer to that article in Harper's on the food bubble, on corporations like JP Morgan making big money out of food. And the assessments are, Cargill said 80% of the profits they were making now come from speculation. But it's financial institutions all over the world that are jumping on the commodification of food at the financial level. The Deutsche Bank, which has invited me a few weeks down the line to brief them on sustainability, and I'm going to talk about this, they had an ad which said, "Do you enjoy rising prices? Everybody talks about commodities. With the Agriculture Euro Fund, you can benefit from the increase in the value of 7 most important agricultural commodities." So, of course, the investors make money, huge money, but the 1 billion people will become 1.2 billion people. Then they'll become 1.5, and then they'll become 2. What is the limit to which you can push this gambling on food, putting food on the global casino, before we have a genocide or we have the kind of instability we saw in Egypt, which actually became a celebration. Josette Cherian, who's the executive director of the World Food Program, which is the world's biggest feeding program. It's under the United Nations, and they bring food wherever there's a food emergency. This is what she said just a week ago. In many protests, she's talking about the protests in Egypt. In many protests, demonstrators have brandished loaves of bread or displayed banners expressing anger about the rising cost of food staples. When it comes to food, the margins between stability and chaos are perilously thin. Volatility on the markets can translate quickly to volatility on the streets, and we all need to remain vigilant. Now, in a situation where the crisis is deep, the crisis is widespread, of course, we can identify some of the Mubaraks of the food system. We can identify the V5 gene giants, we can identify the 5 grain giants, we can identify the 5 food processing giants who Nestle has managed to turn in the land of beautiful dosa and idli and our wonderful breads. It has turned chow mein into the national dish. I can travel to the remotest part of India, including up in our hill areas where the bush cart is being pushed up the hill slope. And I stopped to ask, and what are you selling? Chow mein. And this very, very rapid change in food culture was also addressed in Susan's presentation on Belize, where she showed that as tourism takes over, actually, what is being globalized is the worst of human diets ever imagined. And that's, again, an example of what I would call anti-food. Just like seed became anti-seed, we are successfully making food anti-food. High fructose corn syrup, anti-food. GMOs, anti-food. They should not qualify for that wonderful honor of being called food. We call it Anna. And the president will recognize the Taittiriya Upanishad, which says everything is food, everything is something else is food, and food is the divine. And therefore you must respect food, and therefore you must make sure nobody goes hungry in your sphere of influence. But the issue today is not only are there these concentrations of power, which are visible, I think the more serious issue is because of deregulation, because of lack of democratic control, instruments have been unleashed which are under nobody's control. Whether those technologies be GM technologies, or those technologies be the tools of financial speculation, the derivatives and the commodity indexes, etc., which nobody has any idea what they're doing, how they're running, and how you could stop this absolute unraveling of the food bubble, like we saw the unraveling of the housing bubble. Now, when you lose a house, you're homeless. When you lose food, you're dead. And that is the big reason why we need to build alternatives. And that's why I honor so much the very courageous decisions so many of you, the young people, have made to say you're going to shift the paradigm, you're going to change the way food is produced, and you're going to change the way food is thought about. When it comes to reclaiming seed sovereignty and food sovereignty, I think in both of them, the issue is repairing the cycles. Seed was supposed to give rise to seed. Seed sovereignty is linked to allowing open source seeds to flourish again. Seed-saving initiatives, community seed banks of the kind we build in Navdanya, reclaiming seed as a commons, and having seed for those emergencies linked to climate change. We distribute seeds. We distributed them after cyclones, after the tsunami, during the drought of 2 years ago, and that's what's been able to allow farmers who have been wiped out to have seed. And we've reached faster than those who would push hybrids and GMOs, as the attempt was made in Haiti. But we haven't stopped there. We've done legal action, and Percy Smyser's case is so outstanding in terms of how property rights on seeds and genes can create a police state. Percy Smyser's field of canola was contaminated, and then Monsanto sued him for stealing their genes. And he said, but you have polluted, and on the polluter pays principle, you should be compensating me. But they wanted $200,000. Fortunately, at the highest level, the fine was struck down, though the majority of judges on the panel said, but if you start to patent genes, these are inevitable consequences. And that's why I'm so happy the United States, which pushed life patenting, gene patenting, seed patenting, in a recent case related to the patenting of the breast cancer gene, actually made an intervention and said genes should not be patented. I think we need to push this the next step to say seeds should not be patented. And because Gandhi has been our inspiration in India and a major inspiration to the founding of Navdanya, the movement for seed saving and ecological farming, every time there's an attempt to introduce laws that would make it illegal for farmers to have seed, like the 2004 Seed Act, we do what Gandhi did so brilliantly on the beach of Dandi, where when the British had introduced the salt laws that said Indians can't make salt, only the British will sell us salt, Gandhi went to the sea, picked up salt, and said, nature gives it for free, we need it for our survival, we will not obey the salt laws, we will continue to make salt. And eventually, of course, those laws were struck down. That was called the salt satyagraha. Satyagraha means the force of truth. Satya, truth, agraha, the force. That's the basis of nonviolent non-cooperation. So every time a bad law is introduced, we do a seed satyagraha. And we basically tell the government, I took 1 million signatures a few years ago in 2005 and said, nature has given this biodiversity, our ancestors have evolved it and bred it. It is our duty to pass this on to future generations. We will not obey any law that comes in the way of our ecological, ethical duty to save seeds. And in terms of reclaiming food sovereignty, so much of this conference talked about localization and enriched the concept beyond distance to building community. That it is about relationships, as Fred said in his opening keynote, food as relationship. But if food is relationship, then food localization is about rebuilding the connections. Rebuilding the connections to the earth, rebuilding the connections in community, rebuilding the connections of our own sense of good food. And I think one of the most important challenges is what I call knowledge sovereignty. We can't have seed sovereignty and food sovereignty without knowledge sovereignty. Knowledge sovereignty means you know what the reality is, and you trust yourselves. You don't leave your trust, as Steve said yesterday, to Kansas City, Minneapolis, and Chicago, where all this gambling takes place. Reclaiming means we build alternatives that have worked for thousands and thousands of years and can serve humanity for thousands of years in the future. Now, one of the commodity indicators that has dominated agriculture is the category called yield per acre. Now, yield per acre doesn't measure what you don't grow. It only measures a monoculture. It doesn't measure how much extra resources and financial inputs you're putting into the system. It only measures labor, and the less labor you can have, the more productive your system is. So every farmer wiped out contributes to the increase in productivity of food. We've been working in Navdanya to assess agriculture differently. And we practice it differently. From monocultures, we shift to biodiversity, from chemical intensive to ecologically intensive. And the biodiverse, ecologically intensive systems produce so much more nutrition per acre, and we are now measuring health per acre and wealth per acre for the community. And I just want to run through very quickly some figures to show you how, if only we worked with nature, we would have no scarcity. A system, we do 5 crop systems, 7 crop systems, 9 crop systems, which is what Navdanya, the 9 seeds, 9 crops means, and a 12 crop system. The 12 crop system, the production is 2,680 kilograms per acre, compared to a monoculture of chemical farming of maize, which is 2,000. Protein, 421 against 242. I'm not going to go into the kilograms, micrograms, milligrams, just for saving time. Carbohydrates, 1,600 compared to 1,400. Fat, 131 compared to 78. Folic acid, vital for lactating and pregnant mothers, 2,200 compared to 437. Calcium, 5,052 compared to 218. Iron, 143 compared to 50. Phosphorus, 9,500 compared to 7,000. Magnesium, 3,600 compared to 3,000. Potassium, 11,000 compared to 6,000. Zinc, 9,000 compared to 1,200. Now, on the basis of the nutrient outputs of this diversified ecological systems with tight cycles that intensify biodiversity and intensify ecological processes, our calculations show that the small farms of India could not just feed all of India. We don't need to have malnutrition and hunger. We could feed 2 times of India, twice the amount. Of course, it's the small farms that are under attack, and that's another reason why I want to say thank you to all of you who are beginning on small farms, showing that the idea, the historical error that said small farms must disappear is just an error of assumption, and we are going to correct it historically. While each of us acts in our particular place and context to build the seed sovereignty and food sovereignty, we must do it with a planetary consciousness of being part of a large earth family and being part of a human community worldwide, which is why we need solidarity. We need solidarity to know what NAFTA is doing, as the contribution on Mexico showed, to the Mexican farmers and to the Mexican base. Because for me, sovereignty is not just about people. Seed sovereignty is about the seed as much as about the farmer saving seed. Food sovereignty is as much about the food as a subject to the eater and the producer of food. And I think, Jane, you said at the table should be food, the person called food. And that was what's so beautiful about the first food session, where the order of food, Rita we call it in Sanskrit, the right order, is brought to bear. So quite clearly, reclaiming seed sovereignty and food sovereignty is also about the deepest of spirituality and the deepest of ethics and morality and the deepest of our cultural experiences. It is not just about economics. But of course, if you get your ethics right, your economics will flow out naturally as a life-giving economy. And that's why I've built not just Navdanya, but the School of the Seed, the Earth University, the Bij Vidyapeeth, because localization is, of course, the imperative. But understanding this planet, understanding each other, understanding and learning from each other is such an important part, because we could, feel very calm in one little comfort zone while Mexico goes under in hunger. India, it becomes from every 4th Indian to every 2nd Indian. And beyond a point, people don't organize like in Egypt. People just give up. And we can't allow that level to be reached. That's why global solidarity in the food justice movement is vital. We will reclaim seed sovereignty and food sovereignty everywhere and for everyone, or we will not be able to reclaim it for anyone, anywhere. That is why we need a biodiversity of movements. We need different people doing different things. Some doing gardening and some doing advocacy. Some doing organizing and some doing nutritional literacy. We will make a transition to another future of food based on our fundamental freedoms and the order of food if we re-embed food in community and community in the earth community. Cultivating another future of food is cultivating the earth community, participating in earth citizenship, and practicing earth democracy and food democracy, knowing that our lives depend on it. Thank you. Thank you.
evening. My name is Andy Fisher, I'm Executive Director of the Community Food Security Coalition, and I am honored to have been invited to respond to Dr. Shiva's talk, which is no small feat. She is certainly one of the giants of modern-day thought. My goal for the next few minutes is to situate her analysis in the context of the U.S. community food movement. And ours is not a monolithic movement, but one comprised of people who share some parts of a common ideology, but differ on other beliefs. What unites us is the desire for a broad and loosely defined set of changes to the food system to make it more sustainable, healthier, fairer, safer, and tastier. With regard to Dr. Shiva's talk and the concept of food sovereignty, I'd like to emphasize that the crux of the concept of food sovereignty, what differentiates it from the other concepts such as food security, is ownership and power. With a food sovereignty analysis, we ask such basic questions as who controls the seeds, who controls the means of production, distribution, and retailing, the production process and technology, and as with any political economic approach, we must ask also who benefits. In the United States, we're not accustomed to thinking about power dynamics. When we want to eliminate tax cuts for the rich, the press admonishes us not to start a class warfare. We're told that what's good for GM is good for America. In other words, corporations are working for the public interest. You guys got the joke. We often ignore questions of power, control, and ownership. Instead, we tend to focus on a single goal and remain blind to these very other fundamental matters. Let me give you a few examples. And these are oversimplified examples. Locavores often are concerned about where the food comes from. How many miles away was the food produced or grown? Organic advocates focus on the production methods used, where pesticides or chemical fertilizers employed. Nutritionists often focus on the nutrient content of the food. How many vitamins, calories, grams of fat, or carbs did it have? Or if we talk about a community-based food project such as an urban farm, we ask, did it reduce hunger? How many more servings and fruits and vegetables are participants eating now than before? How many acres of farmland were saved from sprawl? Did it reduce carbon emissions? And these are all extremely important and valid concerns and questions, and I don't mean to belittle them in any way. Yet when choosing which food to purchase, how often do we ask, where do the profits go? How much of the food system does the company producing or selling the product control? Does my purchase promote economic democracy or economic oligarchy? And we're trained to think of democracy as voting. One person, one vote. It's an overly simplified concept which focuses on the simple mechanics of choosing leaders and less about the social and economic conditions in which those leaders are chosen. And one definition of democracy that I found on the internet is the doctrine that the numerical majority of an organized group can make decisions binding on the whole group. How democratic then is our food system when one company such as Walmart can control 1/4 of the groceries sold in the U.S.? As former Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, we can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. And I would modify that saying to we can have food security in this country, or we can have the food supply concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. Walmart is a great example of how the community food movement could learn from Dr. Shiva and the concept of food sovereignty. And I'd just like to take a few minutes talking about that company. First, a few facts about Walmart. Their annual revenues in 2009 were $400 billion. Walmart would be the 25th largest country in the world, somewhere between Norway and Austria. They have 8,000 stores worldwide. Each Walmart store in the U.S. with 200 employees costs taxpayers $420,000 in public benefits, or $1.7 billion annually. They employ 1.3 million persons in the United States alone. They capture 1 out of every 4 grocery dollars in the U.S. And the Walton family, who heirs of founder Sam Walton, are extremely rich. 6 of them are in the Forbes 400, with a combined net worth of $90 billion, which is about the same as Bill Gates and Warren Buffett put together. And then Walmart's suburban and rural markets are saturated. The only room for them to grow in the U.S. is into urban areas where they face stiff resistance. Recently, Walmart has tried to change its image of bad apple and made some high-profile changes to its practices and increased its charitable donations. For example, they announced that they're distributing $2 billion over 5 years in food and cash to food banks to alleviate hunger. They'll be substantially increasing their purchases of locally grown food. And they'll be reducing their prices for fruits and vegetables, reformulating their own brands to reduce sodium, and building stores in food deserts. And I could tell you individually why these claims aren't accurate and why they really are just doing what business as usual, but I don't have time to do that. So what I want to say is, with these announcements, Walmart is trying to divide and conquer our movement, and they're succeeding. Because our movement does not have the food sovereignty analysis Dr. Shiva spoke about, that core value of an economic democracy, some of our colleagues are seduced by the scale of change that Walmart can provide. In other words, $2 billion can go a long way to reducing hunger. Ching food banks issue a press release praising Walmart for its commitment to fighting hunger. Less sodium in processed foods and lower cost produce can help to reduce hypertension and diabetes. Kaching public health advocates write an op-ed to their local newspaper praising Walmart for its commitment to the health of their consumers. Others in the community food movement see these changes to be PR strategies with little substance and less transparency, whose sole goal is to buy goodwill so that the company can more easily expand into urban areas. Because these advocates support a food democracy, they say that any store that controls that much of the marketplace, that funnels that much profit into the hands of a few, is antithetical to our interest, no matter how wonderful the changes they might make. Yet the community food movement is not just fighting the powers that be. One of the most innovative, seductive, and inspiring elements of the community food movement is that we're creating a new food system. We're opening space for a new type of economy based in community, by community, and for community. We are now up to 6,000 farmers markets, quadrupled since the early 1990s, supporting family farmers, feeding persons with healthy and delicious food, and building community in the process. We are 12 million more gardeners in 2010 than 2009, and in places like Detroit are reclaiming the 100,000 vacant lots for productive purposes. We're feeding 1 out of 10 school kids with farm fresh food at some point during the year, educating them about where their food comes from, giving them healthier meals, and putting more money into the pockets of local farmers. We're at least 2,500 CSA farms with hundreds of thousands of members knowing who their farmer is. And we're at least 100 communities with food policy councils with citizens engaged in advising government. We are communities that have been neglected by corporate America, creating new businesses that meet people's needs rather than the needs of corporations. If the old bumper sticker used to read, "People, not profit," ours would read, "Profit for the people." We are building food sovereignty with every new garden we plant, every farm we support, every purchase we don't make at Walmart. And these steps are essential, but they're not enough. We need to think outside the bubble. We need to think outside the bubble of our hip communities. And we as a movement need to think beyond our single issues, beyond hunger, beyond health disparities, beyond farmland loss. We need to think beyond food. Our work, as it is in India and other countries, is about justice, economic democracy, and survival of cultures, individuals, and the planet. Those are our ultimate goals. Food is just a tool to get us there. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I'm speechless, but you're probably not. So we've decided to let this session run a little long to allow for your questions for Dr. Shiva and Andy Fisher. So please come to one of the microphones you see. or ask for assistance if you would like to have a question. And we have, I think, some ushers out there that can direct people. Thank you. Yes, right here.
Thank you for a really inspiring talk. You discussed the role of science and technology sort of aiding in the exploitation of seed diversity. And I'm curious, what do you see the role of science and technology in repairing ecological cycles and repairing the diversity of seed banks?
Hello?
And yesterday there was a panel of scientists who were addressing the issue of control over science itself. And, I've kind of been playing on the theme of seed becoming anti-seed and food becoming anti-food. And under corporate control, knowledge and science becomes anti-knowledge and anti-science. Because it fabricates, it manipulates. You don't know the truth anymore. Constant propaganda about GMOs for hunger when not a single GM has been engineered for higher yields. And empirically, in India, the claim of 1,500 kilograms per acre of cotton, the averages were 500. The Doug Sherman study was presented yesterday. So we need science and we need technology. But we can't have science and technology defined undemocratically by the very corporations that are destroying the planet and the food system. We need it defined by independent scientists in the public domain. That's why we need public universities defended intensely. We need new partnerships. We need new partnerships between communities and scientists, like participatory breeding, which can have so much more benefits for farmers and gains in food production than genetic engineering or chemical agriculture. So there's a room for science, but ecological science, democratic science, and a science that serves people.
Hi, thank you. I'm a fan of yours. I'm a vegan, and I kind of take it personally when people talk against soy. I know that GMO soy is very bad, and that feeding it to cattle is disastrous, and it's bad for as a resource. You have to grow too much to get too little out of it. But do you believe that soy, if it's organic, is it not a food? Do you believe what's its origin? Where is it from?
Well, the origin of soya is East Asia. And if you notice, what does the East Asian cuisine use? Only fermented soya. And that's because of the anti-nutritive factors, which they knew about. And it's only when the soya industry got very big in this country, both to provide cattle feed, to provide for edible oils, and for putting into ingredients. I mean, when the movement for GMO-free food started in Europe, I remember, they tried to look at the shelves to see how could they avoid GM soya. And they found it was very difficult because 90% foods have some ingredient or the other made from soya. Now, when I say it's anti-food, well, I was talking about genetically engineered soya, but I think imposition, like in our case, soya was imposed on us by destroying all our edible oil production. 10 million farmers, 2 million processors, that becomes an anti-food. Every culture has its own food. And globalization and a monoculture of the diet ends up damaging not just the planet, the invasion into the Amazon was an example I gave, but also starts to damage health. I mean, it's been identified, soy has been identified in the book on the future, on Stealing Our Future by Theo. You know, it's 10th in the list of endocrine disruptors and male infertility. It has very high levels of phytoestrogens, a female mimicking hormone.
I've heard that's disputed.
Yeah. So, I think a globalized monoculture of anything, it's just like in pollution. Pollution is too much of what is a good thing in small quantity. Why are the animal farms, the factory farms, they call them CAFOs in this country. It's a very strange word. Yeah. Concentrated animal farm operations. Why are they so polluting? Because they're putting out too much of what would otherwise be nutrients in the right quantity. So too much of any one thing and forced. I mean, they call India the El Dorado of soya. Now that's forced.
From Argentina, they're doing it there too. They're forcing soy in Argentina too.
Maybe other people can ask questions.
Let me go to this gentleman here, and then we'll come over here. Yeah.
So the activities of Monsanto are certainly criminal, and it's easy to not like Walmart, but these corporations are just products of the system. And so I think what we're really talking about is the logic of capitalism, the logic of the system, which results in other things like, and I think the logic of that system is consolidation of power. And it results in other things like the consolidation of media, and what small number of corporations own so many of the media outlets in this country, and the influence that corporations come to have on government. All of these things seem to be products of the logic of the system, so I think that's what we're talking about. And I just, going from there, wanted to talk about this kind of American idea of progress and how what we're talking about is redefining that idea of progress, and taking that back from where it's gone according to this logic, and redefining that logic as well. So toward community food, that sort of thing. But I'm wondering, there are also products of the system like space exploration, nanotechnology, the medical industry, where we have very advanced technologies, which of course are dependent on the oil industry. But I'm wondering if you think those two things can go side by side. I mean, I'm totally...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but since we have several people, would you want to frame your question?
Can those things go side by side? I'm fascinated by space exploration. It's very high tech. But we also are talking about community food growing on a very local level. We'd all be happy to see Walmart disappear. But will Walmart ever disappear? And if it does, can we have things like nanotech? Thank you.
See, once you start, I don't even know how to get into that.
Okay. Well, for those who worry about big firms disappearing, I mean, look at Enron. We were talking, the president and I were talking about Enron. It was supposed to control all energy and all water on the planet. And where's it today? And look at the number of banks that went under. And if they hadn't been bailed out with $17 trillion is the overall bailout globally in terms of public financing, they'd have gone. So one thing I've learned from history is concentration of power is a very non-sustainable system. It never can carry on and on and on. It lasts for a short time, and then it must go. It will go on its own logic, and sometimes you nudge it along. I mean, Mubarak had to go. Beyond a point, you can't have a Mubarak carrying on. Hitler had to go. No dictator has lasted forever, but democracies can carry on.
And I just want to add on this question about redefining progress. I completely agree with you. There's kind of an axiom of you get what you measure. So to the extent that GDP measures destruction, that when a hurricane comes through and destroys buildings and we have to reinvest money to rebuild that economy and those buildings, that is considered a net addition to GDP. There's a certain silliness to that, but we are not measuring ecological capital, natural capital, and ecological processes are not valued. And, for example, when a community garden is plowed under for a manufacturing plant or a parking lot or whatever, the work that people have done to that soil, to improve that soil, we don't have a way of quantifying that. And there's a debate on whether we should quantify that and whether we should turn ecology into money. But in our system today, that inability to quantify it means that it's going to continue to get paved over.
Okay, let's go to this question here. Please try to keep your comments and questions as brief as you can. Thank you.
So I guess my question then, to keep it brief is, can capitalism facilitate food justice?
You don't begin with where the problem starts. You know. You begin where you can really solve the issue, which is with the earth, her amazing potential to give us gifts, and our potential, our creative potential to work with nature. That's where you begin. And that sets the standards of what businesses will fit, what will be the role of capital. It's a derivative to borrow from the financial world. It can't be the defining center of the emerging world.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Good evening. A little presumptuous, my question, I think. Thank you.
So
Thank you
the
so
mic
much.
grows tall for your presumptuousness.
Thank you. Sybil Robson, one of the Walmart heirs, is a good personal friend of mine. She's been kind to me. I've had almost a 20-year working relationship with Monsanto. They've funded some of my early efforts that were very noble-hearted. In all my dealings with their ethicists and their public relations people and their plant breeders through the years, I've always been treated with exemplary kindness. The chief executive officer of the largest private bank in the largest financial center in the world right now is a childhood friend of mine. How do we reconcile these truths to a system in the grip of a form of mass insanity?
Well, your friends are not the entity called the corporation, which has a legal personality independent of them. And that's why they can leave the company, and the company carries on till it goes bust because of its excesses. Your friends and their love for you is not the measure of the Walmart and the Monsantos. Their action as companies who've taken on a personality which they don't have. They aren't persons. And I think that's at the root of our contemporary crisis. That we, as I mentioned this in my talk, that we've allowed fictions, constructions, tools, technologies that we have constructed that were supposed to serve us to become rulers. They rule us now. Until we have that paradigm shift that you're all making, to say, no, I'm going to treat reality as real. Real people as real, my friends in Walmart, Monsanto, as distinctive from the corporation, Walmart and Monsanto. And I'd like to just mention in this context, I am preparing a major campaign, which I hope many of you will join, which by the middle of this year will, on the basis of the failed promises and the false promises and the failed technology around GMOs and Monsanto, call for a disinvestment from Monsanto so that people can start putting their money into helping young people have organic farms, helping local businesses set up again. There isn't scarcity. I think so much of what JP Morgan does with the food bubble or what Walmart does in trying to invade India, 400 million retailers we have in the food system, and they want to replace it with a Walmart. They wouldn't be able to do this if we didn't empower them with their money. And that's why a satyagraha on investment and a redirection of wealth is vital for our times.
Just two small points on that. One is, I think I saw a few development directors in the audience who are wanting to talk to you, given those connections. You can have your friends put their money into philanthropy. I mean, it's not the ideal, but, certainly there's, no one needs to have $20 billion. And if they need to have $20 billion, well, maybe there's a psychiatrist they need to go to, too. But my other point is that, we're working with a food service company that is not small, who shall remain nameless. But, we're advising them on how to become more sustainable. And there's lots of questions about, if that's even possible. But one of the things we keep bumping up against, and I see it in the same with Walmart, is the lack of transparency. And corporations do not want to open up their books or open up their doors to outside scrutiny. And if they're going to be good corporate citizens, and if people are going to be able to watchdog what they're doing, that transparency is very vital. So just something to pass along.
Sorry, are you both up for a couple of more questions? Okay, we might not be able to accommodate everyone who's up here, but we'll get a couple more, so go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much, Dr. Shiva, for all you do. It's amazing that you are. I just wanted to ask you, I didn't notice in this conference anyone addressing the health issue of the GMOs, and I wonder what you think of the work of Jeffrey Smith and the Institute for Responsible Technology and all the science that has been done, that's sort of hushed on the health issue of the GMO.
Actually, just today there's been an announcement about new research that is showing that the excessive use of Roundup because of Roundup resistant crops is leading to abortions in animals and could be triggering them in humans. And it's an alert from a scientist who heads the I've got the name here, Dr. Ron Huber, who looks after emergent diseases at the Phytopathology Society. And he's calling this an emergency. And he's calling it an emergency also in the context of the approval of Roundup-resistant alfalfa, which will increase the acreage. There's also tremendous work done by Argentinian scientists who are showing very, very rapid increase of birth defects in areas being sprayed with Roundup because of Roundup-resistant soya having overtaken Argentina. And then there's the work of Seralini, and there's the work of Arpad Putzai. And that's why I was talking about independent science needing protection, because every one of these independent scientists is under attack. A very good German film made called Scientists Under Attack. All the scientists who did public work for their governments, but it showed there was health hazards, were removed like a fly out of a teacup and thrown out. And I don't think we can afford to give up knowledge in that careless way.
Let me grant our final question to you. I know you've been waiting for
actually,
a while.
I was waiting after the gentleman who said he had friends in big places.
Oh, I'm sorry. So how about we'll take two final questions from each mic. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming and educating us. I want to ask you a question on behalf of myself and those in the audience and those who are watching who've only just heard of these Terminator seeds and Walmart owning 1/4 of grocery stores. Can you please recommend some literature, especially books, for us to read and educate on our own so we can take it back to our communities and really let them know where their power is, especially in relation to food?
So you can tell. Well, I'll mention the books on which I've dealt with things like GMOs in Terminator, a book called Biopiracy, a book called Stolen Harvest.
The two that come to mind immediately are one is The Grocery Gap by Mark Winnie, and the other one is called Food Justice. It's by Bob Gottlieb. It's published by MIT Press.
Thank you so much.
I'm really glad that we had that question, in fact. We've been talking about how important it is to walk away with concrete resources and knowledge, so thank you. So our final question to you, sir.
Okay, it might be a whole other can of worms, but I was wondering how population growth, how you guys feel about it as food activists. You know, make some comments.
I'll take it on, then you take it on. Yeah. Well, you know, I've addressed this in Earth Democracy. I won't go into too much detail, but India had a totally stable population up to the year 1800. 1857 is when the British, till 1800. In 1757 is when the East India Company started to take over and started to change the land laws and introduce what was called zamindari, the land takeover, which dispossessed the peasantry, and then the population started to rise. Same happened with the Highland clearances in Scotland. The population started to rise, and then the Scots moved to Nova Scotia and everywhere else. Population instability, as I would call it, is part of the ecological instability, and we need to see it in that way, not as something happening independently to one species, which is a purely biological system, and very often they talk about the population bomb as if women's wombs were exploding. And that's not how it happens, you know. Very concrete decisions get made. And there's two population problems right now. One is the instability of those who've been robbed of their living resources, their land, their ability to produce. And a very, very good book on the population issue by Mahmood Mamdani, who now teaches at Columbia, was in Uganda, did his PhD in India. And when he asked a landless peasant, he said, "Why do you have so many kids?" And the landless peasant says, "The landlord can get his second tractor. All I can get is my next child, because it's part of your economic security system." But when I say there are two population problems, you know, one population problem is Rome. It's got a pope, and the pope says you should have no birth control. But they have a negative population growth, and 70% of Italy is now above 60. That's a population problem too, when you're not able to reproduce in balance. And that is because of multiple issues in the rich countries because life is too costly, in the poor countries because it's too vulnerable. And I think that's why the rights, issues of food justice, land justice is vital. Kerala has a population decline because they gave land to everybody. They have land justice, food justice. Everyone has access to healthcare. Everyone has access to education, 100% literacy. Kerala, the southernmost state of India. So, you know, it's not a linear sort of biological, thoughtless thing that's going on this planet. Very complex.
And I'm assuming you're talking about population growth in the context of whether we have enough food to feed the world. And just two things on that. One is Food First has done some great research on that there's plenty of food to feed people in the world. It's really a matter of access and matter of price. And then the second thing is to think about population growth within the U.S. and our standard of living and how that is also being replicated in other countries around the world as people look to the Western countries as a model and how that impacts the ecology of the world. So to look at population growth not as their problem but as our problem.
Dr. Shiva's books are on sale in the lobby, and we hope that you will, two of the ones that she mentioned, Stolen Harvest and Biopiracy are there, along with her fabulous Earth Democracy. So as we bring a close to our food conference, please just let me thank one more time the conference organizer, Allison Caruth, and the conference coordinator, Lindsay Naylor, for their very good work. Let me also say that Vandana Shiva will be in the state for another 2 weeks. She may be making other public appearances. You can see those items on our website at the Wayne Morse Center. So please join me in thanking this wonderful leader. Oh, it's such a gift. It was such a gift. Such a gift.
I'll go pick up my bag from the
Okay. Why don't you let me